Welcome back to the Armchair Traveler. If you are new here, you are very welcome. My name is Judy, and I love travel and history. Last time we visited some secular sites in the Marais, along with one restaurant. Today we'll take a look at the second half of the Marais visit, including the Jewish Quarter, 3 Holocaust memorials, and yet another restaurant. If you think my content is interesting, please like, share, and subscribe. This won't cost you anything, but it will really help the channel grow. History content can be really word-heavy, so sometimes the details don't survive and make it into a video blog. If you're interested and would like to dig deeper, visit my regular blog where you'll find deep dives, travel tips, reviews, warnings, and all kinds of help. The address is armchairtraveler2022.wordpress.com. If you'd like to keep up with my posts and find out when I'm putting new material up, you can also follow me on Twitter, where my handle is @armchair2022. You'll recall that the Marais was one of the most expensive areas of the city, though after the French Revolution it no longer had the aristocratic cachet that it had in the 17th and 18th centuries. Because of this, the district became popular and an active commercial area, hosting one of Paris's main Jewish communities. By the end of the 19th century and during the first half of the 20th, the area around here, at the Rue de Rosiers, referred to as Pletzl, welcomed many East European Jews who reinforced the district's cultural specialization. During World War II, the Jewish community was targeted by the Nazis who were occupying France. They were chased out, many were murdered, and the area, of course, ran downhill after that. This was the heart, at least for a while, of the vibrant Jewish district in the city. When I visited in 1970, however, it had long since gone downhill. I remember being warned off as it was considered generally unsafe. Perhaps that was unfair. By 1973, with my brand new, rather strong husband in tow, we visited. You could still see observant Jews on the sidewalks, and there were several kosher restaurants, the most important of which was Joe Goldenberg. That restaurant had already been blown up in a terrorist attack, but it was still a concern. On my next visit to the area in 2012, Joe Goldenberg was gone, and the area was obviously gentrifying. That gentrification has proceeded apace. The initial wave of gentrification included many who were sympathetic to the residents and who tried to maintain the feel and history of the area while they were fixing it up. I don't know what happened, but the money and the upgrades in the Marais materialized but didn't have much improving effect on this street. What it did do was raise the rents and drive out the now mostly immigrant community. Coming up from the south, I had to pay attention in 2019 not to trip over street people on the sidewalk. All the charm that had been there before had disappeared. On the left is Chez Marais, just off the Rue de Rosiers. It has maintained its original appearance, but it's now a falafel and carry-out joint. On the right is a deli called Sasha Finkelstein, or just Finkelstein's. It was closed the day I visited, but it's still a Jewish deli and is generally called the Yellow Deli. When my husband and I came here on our honeymoon in 1973, he really wanted to visit the Marais. The best-known Jewish restaurant at the time was Joe Goldenberg's. We went in and had lunch. I remember it was merely okay, but truth to tell, he didn't like it at all. We hadn't been married long enough for me to civilize his taste buds. In 1982, Palestinian extremists murdered 6 people and injured 22 at the restaurant here. The terrorists lobbed a live hand grenade into the dining room, then charged in with machine guns. Joe Goldenberg rebuilt and reopened. When my husband and I came back one more time in 2001, it had reopened, but eventually Madame Goldenberg closed it. I had to pay very close attention to find the synagogue, even with Google Maps whispering in my ear. It was designed in 1913 by Hector Guimard, the same man who designed the Paris metro station entryways. You might remember hearing about him in a previous video blog. He designed the lovely Art Nouveau entrance markers for the Paris metro system. There was no number, no obvious marking. There was an indication of Hebrew script and a Star of David above the door, but you had to look for it. All of the Jewish cultural and religious sites are carefully guarded. If you look carefully, you can see the grating in front of the synagogue. In addition to the synagogue, however, there are more. The horror has by no means been forgotten here in Paris, and there are at least 3, and there might be more, memorial sites worth our attention. Shoah is the Hebrew word for catastrophe. The term in French refers specifically to the killing of nearly 6 million Jews in Europe by Nazi Germany and its collaborators during World War II. English-speaking countries more commonly refer to this as the Holocaust, which is Greek for sacrifice by fire. There's no sugarcoating what happened here. An entire cultural group was separated out, systematically demonized, dehumanized, then rounded up first as slave labor if they were fit enough, or allowed to die from disease, deprivation, or just plain exterminated in concentration camps. The shame of this all runs quite deep, but apparently not quite deep enough since we still see signs of it all over the world. On the left you see a memorial in the Shoah crypt. On the right is a carved memorial showing Jews being used for forced labor. Many Frenchmen resisted the Nazis and tried to protect their Jewish neighbors, often at terrible cost. This wall of the righteous shows the names of those known to have died in the attempt. Although the death toll during World War II in France was immense, in part because of the efforts of the righteous, the overall survival rate of the Jewish population was up to 75%, which was one of the highest rates in all of Europe. The memorial to the martyrs of the deportation refers to Jews who were deported, mostly from Vichy France. There is a small above-ground park here filled with roses. It sits just across the street from the apse of Notre Dame de Paris. When I visited, the entry was staffed by a group of young people. Of course I spoke to them. I asked them a little bit about the deportation. I knew the general story, as well as about whether they had seen the fire on the day Notre Dame had burned. It turned out they had seen it, and apparently it took a good long while before anyone thought to shut down the park and tell everyone to go home. He also has security, and with good reason. Terrorism, fueled by anti-Semitism here in the country, is on the rise. This is a view of part of the interior of that memorial. The memorial itself sits under the site of a former morgue on Ile de la Cité and quite close to Notre Dame Cathedral. Figures on how many people were affected by this are a little confusing because it wasn't just Jews who were the targets of deportations. The Nazis and their adherents used ethnic cleansing to eliminate Jews, Roma, also called Gypsies, Ukrainians, homosexuals, intellectuals, people labeled physically or mentally defective who were of no use, in their opinion, to the war effort, and more, including opponents of the state. The level of the murders was immense and left huge holes in society, as well as a stain of what happened in the supposedly liberal democracies, which doesn't wash out very easily. In this view of the interior, notice the barred window at ground level and the abstract bars. I believe those are meant to symbolize barbed wire. The area here is actually open to the sky, a reminder that freedom is still possible. This is the rose garden above the memorial to the deportation, in full bloom in August when I visited. The sign reads, "These resurrection roses were created on the initiative of women deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp and are dedicated to the memory of all the victims of the deportation." Ravensbrück concentration camp was the largest concentration camp for women in the German Reich, and in the concentration camp system, second only to the camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Anne Frank Community Garden is surrounded by a high wall. The name remembers Anne Frank, a Dutch victim of the Nazis during World War II. The park includes a graft of the chestnut tree that Anne Frank admired from her window in Amsterdam. At the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, you can still see the barred hatch in the roof of the building where she and her family hid. It looks quite similar to the arched roofway you see here. I read memorial plaques because I like to know why people decided to name a park or another site after a person. Bertha Weil was a pioneering 20th century art dealer who created a vogue for modern art here in Paris. She was the first Parisian dealer to peddle Picassos, but that was by no means the extent of the people she represented. By 1941, rising anti-Semitism and the outbreak of World War II forced her to close the gallery. She managed to survive, apparently in poverty, despite the fact that she was not only Jewish, but by all accounts, troublesome and obnoxious. In 1946, some of the painters she had championed over the years came together and held an auction of their donated artwork, the proceeds of which went to support her in her old age so she could live in comfort the last few years of her life. Flunch is a French cafeteria chain, and you can mark me down as one of its fans. It's a blend of cafeteria and never-ending buffet. You can also order carry-out, which must have been a very smart move during the pandemic. This one, located in the shadows of the Pompidou Center, is no exception. The food is good, normally served up with a smile. There are free refills on the fruits and vegetables. You can order individual dishes or a combination plate, and the desserts are not just worth a look but a fork. So is the wine, which is remarkably good and remarkably inexpensive for downtown Paris. Sometimes there's even a buy one, get one free offer. Fish is usually on the menu and cooked properly, not until it's dead. They also label the origin of all the meats to avoid any confusion. On Sundays, I've noticed plenty of senior singles, sometimes seated together. It's a nice place with good food and filled mostly with nice people, some of whom were always willing to talk. On this visit, I managed to arrive on the day when the special was a never-ending pot of cooked oysters. They were excellent. This isn't my photo, it comes from the Flunch website, but I thought my vegetarian viewers might appreciate knowing that there is always a vegetable platter. It's a little less than €7, and based on my sampling of the vegetable side dishes, is pretty good. I hope you enjoyed our tour through parts of the Marais and the lunch. I look forward to seeing you next time here on The Armchair Traveler.